Hello, I'm Steph from My Driver Classic, and I'm sure when you clicked on the video expecting to see an Ami 8, you probably weren't expecting to see this rather delightful 2CV. But look, we couldn't tell you the story of the Ami 8 without giving a wee nod to the 2CV, because without this particular car, we wouldn't have the Ami 8 that we're testing today. So what's the story? Well, very briefly, because we're going to cover off much more later, starts with the 2CV, evolves into the Ami 6, and then with a bit of refinement, it gives you this delightful Ami 8. Now, you may not have seen many of these in Great Britain because they weren't as popular as they were in France. In fact, in France from 1969 to 1973, they sold an astonishing 1.8 million of these delightful little cars. But what's the attraction and why were they so popular? Well, in today's video, we're going to try and discover that. We're going to have a look around the outside, under the bonnet, take her out for a test drive and have a bit of an exhaust note in there as well. So let's go exploring the Ami 8.
Citroen did incredible things in the 20th century. They made cars like the 2CV, the DS, and most importantly, they took risks and made cars which stood out from what competitors were doing, both visually and tech spec wise. Now let's roll back to 1948. Morris are presenting the Morris Minor to the world as an everyman's car, and Citroen have rolled out the 2CV. Now it's not anything particularly new because of course it had been initially conceived in that mid to late 30s before kind of coming to a stop because of the Second World War. But in 48 they re-roll it back out, they've tweaked it, they've made a few adjustments, and they present a car which is easy to maintain. You don't need to be a mechanic to keep it on the road. It can be fixed at home. It gave many miles per gallon and it could be driven and used with gusto, which meant it quickly became a common sight throughout France. However, despite being the car that many think of when you say name a French classic, Citroën recognised by even as early as the mid to late 50s that the everyman car of the range needed a refresh, and with that the Citroen Ami 6 was introduced in 1961. Now it's worth mentioning this because it also trumps the launch of the Renault 4 by just a few months, but that's really important because it was its real major key competitor in that budget family car market. Now just like those later 2CVs, it had the 602cc engine. I think you could option it out on the 2CV from later in the 60s. And just like that 2CV, you could whip out the seats to double up as picnic chairs, should the mood fancy. And then later on, in 1969, the Ami 8 follows. Still got that 602cc engine with all four wheels independently spun by coil springs, and it's got interaction between front and rear. 4 hydraulic shock absorbers, 4 inertia dampers, and the front anti-roll bar. The steering is rack and pinion and it's front inboard discs with rear drums. So nothing groundbreaking, but something that people knew and recognised, and with that it became a big hit. Interestingly, there are many different miles per gallons quoted even in their brochures, and so in one brochure it says 41, in another brochure it says nearly 50, but I think anything upwards of 40 is jolly good going, especially for a vehicle of this era. Top speeds again vary from 70 to 74 miles per hour, but as you'll see when we're out, no matter what that exact top speed figure, she easily keeps up with the traffic around us, even in 2023. Sizing wise, for those that have never seen one, and I'm sure there'll be many of you out there that maybe haven't, it's 154 inches, 3.91 metres long and 60 inches, which is roughly 1.52 metres wide. The car sold well throughout its life cycle, and although I mentioned it coming to a conclusion earlier in France, I believe it was sold in Buenos Aires until the late 70s, I think 1978. The car was then replaced by the Citroen Visa, and if you've never seen one of those before, we did a test on one of those a few years ago and it was a nice one. So to find that, just search I Drive a Classic Citroen Visa.
There is a joy in classic motoring that comes from the simplicity within, and this looks incredibly simple when you first look through the window or you're marching past it in a sea of classic cars, and you might miss some of the finer details that take this from being an interesting car to something, in my opinion, that's quite special. And in fact, there are a few trends in this that you'll see elsewhere, carried not only through Citroens but other manufacturers. Now, first of all, I want to talk to you about this barrel-shaped device. Now, if you are a Land Rover aficionado, you'll know roughly what this does, because you see a very similar contraption in the series and in the Defender. It's essentially a fresh air vent which you can twist round to your face or up towards the screen. But it's about 3 degrees today, so guess what? We're shutting that up, and that is not coming back out today. I do not want any more cold air in this car. Now, coming down from there, you've got a nice little cubby hole. Again, just tucked discreetly away so you can pop all your bits and pieces in there. And then we come to our gauges. Now, before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about something I don't usually dwell on too much, which is the steering wheel. Now, you'll notice this is a single spoke design. And if you're watching this and you're a bit of a Citroen fanatic, you'll know that this design started with the DS. And if you're wondering why it's a single spoke, well, let me tell you, it's essentially a bit of a safety thing. Because if you think about steering wheels that came in those 40s, 50s and beforehand cars, they're big clunky affairs with a bolt in the middle. When you think about a car accident and you think, and I mean, it's horrible to think about, but how that can end, steering wheels killed people. They created so much drama, so much damage. Citroen looked at that and said, well, what can we do to make the situation safer? And so you've got all of this here, and the idea from Citroen was not only that, but also so that wherever the wheel was, you could reach through and reach all your controls, or you could see your gauges. And in fact, pre the advent of airbags being commonplace, Mitsubishi actually looked at this from Citroen and said, that's a pretty cool design. And they took it and they put it onto the Mitsubishi Galant, and they carried it through. And so much so that even in my Proton today, as you'll be able to see on this overlay, you've still got that single spoke. So it's incredible, isn't it, that a Citroen designer sat down, designed something, and it's carried through to cars which were sold in the 90s. Now, going back to our gauges in front of us, again, lovely and simple. You can just enjoy the motoring experience. So the two down here, you've got your fuel gauge and you've got your temperature gauge. And above that, you've got your mileometer and you've also got your speedo. Now, the one thing I want to say to you is that if you think that I'm gallivanting round at ginormous speeds of 80 miles per hour today, unfortunately not so. This is all in kilometres, being a French car, so just bear that in mind if you watch me driving and you think I'm speeding, because loads of people commented on the Twingo video and said, Steph, you're doing 50 in a 30, and I said, no, it's kilometres. Anyway, coming down from that, you've got these, you know, do you know, when you get in cars sometimes things are so tactile, and even when they don't feel or look too sturdy, they actually are. So over here we've got the horn. Have a listen to this. Isn't that cute? It's so cheeky. And then you've got your indicators on there as well. Now, if you're in a less road situation, you don't need to be using that horn. You can flash your lights on this one, or you've got your wipers there on this one. And then over here, you've got your light switch. It's remarkably neat and well laid out. It doesn't feel cumbersome. It all feels in its right place. And for me, I feel like I've got everything that I need. I guess, what would I like apart from this? Oh yeah, hazards. Well, guess what? I've got those too, because I've got this little switch down here that I couldn't work out what it did. I love that ticking. I'll tell you what, I bet I wouldn't love that ticking if I was having to use those because I was broken down. They're coming down from there. You've got your cigar lighter. Do you know what? Looking at that, can you see that at home? I think that's an original because it's got that lovely fine drawing of a cigarette on there. I love when people keep things incredibly original. Now, there is one thing missing, which I have noted, is the ashtray, but I'm sure with 1.8 million of these being made, I think you'd be hard pushed not to find an ashtray to pop in. You've also got your heater. Now, this is really interesting. So there's a system under the bonnet, and every time I try and explain this. I don't explain it very well, but essentially what happens is there's a really clever system and it collects the heat coming off the exhaust. So to be clear, not the exhaust fumes, but the heat coming off the exhaust, and it takes it and it stores it in these little devices that almost look like biscuit tins. And then what it does is it funnels that hot air through. Now, it's not particularly warm, not like the Proton that is like baking after 3 minutes, but it's warm enough to keep the chill out of the vehicle. So we'll go with it is sufficient. Now, over on the far right-hand side, you've got that continuation, again, very neatly designed, from that cubby hole over here into a larger cubby hole / glove box over there with another one of those barrel-shaped air vents. And that is pretty much everything that I think I need to show you today. I'm going to show you the gear change as we move along. If you watch the Acadian van video, you'll have a fairly good idea of how we change gear. But not to do the Acadian a disservice, the gear change on this does feel a wee bit smoother and a wee bit nicer, but perhaps that's the age of the gearbox and the wear on it. So, but anyway, we all know what the engine is in this. It's exactly the same as the 2CV. So it's that 602cc. And I think we've got on this 36 brake horsepower. So we've got 36 brake horsepower. You've got your four-speed forward gears on this. There's no synchro on first. Not too disappointed about that. That's kind of what I expected. And we're looking at a 0 to 60 in around 20 seconds. Now, if you're watching that and saying, Steph, I'm sure my 2CV is a wee bit slower than that. Well, it might be, because on paper, it does come up as that, because the aerodynamics with the design of the Ami are far superior to that of the 2CV, which does give you that slight edge, even though you are running the same 2-cylinder engine. Now let's start it up. We'll have a little listen. You have to put your foot flat to the floor, and I was pumping away like mad earlier. Oh, I can't wait to take you out for a drive today, but first of all, have a listen from the back. Right, let's go on an adventure. And we're up into third gear there. We may not make it into fourth today. Now, the weirdest thing for me about driving this isn't changing gear with my right hand, which is what I know everybody is going to ask me about. It's the way I'm driving it. So as you can probably hear, the revs are incredibly high. And for me, when I hear that, if I was in my Morris Minor, I would be thinking, oh my God, this is like blowing my head gasket territory. And do you know what James said to me? Because I'm filming this with my friend James today. He said, Steph, this is aircraft technology that went into the 2CV, that's gone into this. They are designed to be run for hours at high revs. You need to rev the nuts and bolts off the thing. Don't drive it sedately like you drive your little Morris Minor. You've got to put some gusto into it, foot to the floor. Drive it with passion. He said, don't just cruise along in fourth at 40 miles an hour and think that's it, because that's not how the car likes to be driven. And for me, that's the strangest thing to get my head around, not being sat on the left hand side. It's the way that I'm driving this. Hey, there we go, we're up into fourth gear, and I can feel James will be tutting on that back seat thinking she probably could have got a few more kilometres per hour out of that third gear. But look, we're happy, we're up into fourth. And my goodness, this cruises at quite the speed. I thought we were going to have to go for that Ami Super if we wanted a bit of spice in our life as we came along the road. And by the way, if you don't know about the Ami Super, that was fitted with the 4-cylinder, which was so mad at the
time, and it was so overpowered that it was outrunning BMWs. It was an incredible thing. But this alone is sprightly enough. Now as you come round, you'll notice the steering is lovely and responsive, so it's rack and pinion steering on this, and in terms of your brakes, it's inboard discs. Now you might have even spotted those in the engine bay, so you can see this overlay here, me just showing you that in the engine bay. And I'm enjoying this drive a lot more than I thought, because when James pulled me over after we did the first filming, and he said, Steph, you've got to give it some welly, I thought, that's not how I like to drive. But now I'm here and I'm gripping this wheel, and you know what, by the way, it's really responsive, a lot more responsive than I was expecting. I'm enjoying it. This is a car with character. When you look at what it was up against in the market, things like the base Escort, the base Vauxhall Viva, they're nice cars, but this has got a lot more character and a lot more charm. And that's saying something for a car which was being sold in the 60s and 70s, because there weren't an awful lot of boring cars about. But this just pips it to the post slightly in terms of the looks. I love how those headlights look, and right down to the driving position. Now I've had a little sit in a 2CV before, and those seats were okay, but they weren't the comfiest. Jumping into this, I don't know whether it's slightly different or not different at all, but the seats in this one are incredibly comfy. Which does make me wonder why the current owners are selling it, because look, it is a cracking little bit of kit. It's very good fun. And talking about these being designed to be run for hours at high revs, although it's quite loud inside here, and it's certainly a lot louder than that standard 10 we've tested. It's a lot louder than something of a similar age like my Morris Marina. I can barely hear myself thinking this if I'm being very honest about it. It does feel very comfortable, like it could munch up those miles. I don't feel like I'm putting the car under a massive amount of stress as I cruise along. In terms of what mileage I'm doing 90 kilometres per hour, so well, between 80 and 90. So that's around the low 50s in terms of your miles per hour. And it is just taking it all in its stride. I've got fantastic visibility because they've really thought about the driving experience, and that is something that Citroen just do so well, especially in this era. Modern Citroens I can give or take. Citroens in this era, perfect. Now I'm sitting at a nice height. I can see right to the end of the bonnet. I can see over here. Mirrors are positioned perfectly. Everything culminates in giving you real driver confidence, and especially for someone that has never driven one of these before and sitting on the opposite side of the car to what I'm used to. But what would I change? Well, I think for me, the only thing that I would like is for it to be slightly quieter in the cabin. That is my only criticism. Everything else I love. The brakes are sharp enough, they bring the car up to a stop. I didn't expect the car to be quite so sprightly as we cruised along, but it keeps up with modern traffic without exhausting itself. It's comfy enough inside. With this bench seat, you could fit two smallish adults or maybe two kids in the front, or you could just have one person in the front with space between you. You can fit 2 or 3 people in the back, and as you probably saw, the boot is big enough that you can slide enough bits and pieces in to get through a long weekend or maybe a short holiday. So for me, a lot of people will say the 2CV is the winner, but I really, really love this Ami. I love the styling of the 6 slightly more, but if I compare it to the 2CV that it was derived from, this beats it hands down every single time. It is beautiful. I can see why they sold 1.8 million, and I can see why they're still so popular. Now you'll have to let me know what you prefer in the comment section below. Are you Ami 8 or are you 2CV? But until next weekend, when I think we've got a little bit of mechanicking left, and we've got another road test, take care and drive safely.